She has spent 40 years investigating the most classified and contested stories on the planet. She has interviewed military whistleblowers, intelligence operatives, government scientists, and eyewitnesses to events that the official record does not acknowledge. She has been dismissed, marginalized, and systematically discredited by institutions that found her work inconvenient. And through all of it, Linda Moulton Howe has maintained that she was reporting what her sources told her, documenting what the evidence suggested, and following the truth wherever it led, regardless of the professional cost. But something changed. Something happened that moved her beyond the careful language of the investigative journalist and into a different register entirely. In a disclosure that sent shockwaves through the communities that follow her work and well beyond them, Linda Moulton Howe said the words that nobody expected to hear from someone who has spent 4 decades in careful, methodical, source-protected journalism. She said she must tell the truth, and what that truth involves, what she and her sources claim was found beneath the ice of Antarctica, is not a story that fits comfortably inside any existing framework for understanding our world, our history, or our place in the universe. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand who Linda Moulton Howe actually is, because the caricature that her critics have constructed around her bears little resemblance to the person and the career behind it. Howe is a graduate of Stanford University with a master's degree in communication. She worked for decades as a television documentary producer and journalist, winning an Emmy Award for her environmental reporting. She was not someone who arrived at the investigation of anomalous phenomena from the fringes. She arrived from the center of credentialed American broadcast journalism, drawn into territory that surprised her by the quality and consistency of the evidence she kept encountering when she followed stories that mainstream outlets would not touch. Her 1980 documentary, A Strange Harvest, which investigated the phenomenon of animal mutilations across the American West, is still regarded as one of the most thoroughly researched pieces of journalism ever produced on the subject. The mutilations she documented involving cattle and other livestock found with surgically precise excisions of specific organs, complete absence of blood, and no tracks or physical evidence of any predator or human activity at the scene, had been reported by ranchers across multiple states for years before Howe applied the resources of a professional documentary team to systematic investigation. The documentary did not offer easy answers. It documented what the evidence showed and let the audience sit with the implications. That approach, rigorous documentation without premature conclusion, became the signature of everything she did afterward. She has been a consistent presence at the intersection of investigative journalism and phenomena that official institutions declined to investigate for 4 decades. Crop formations, unidentified aerial phenomena, whistleblower testimony from military and intelligence personnel, the gradual disclosure conversation that has shifted dramatically in recent years as the United States government has acknowledged the existence of UAP programs and evidence that was previously denied entirely. Through all of it, Howe has been careful. She qualifies her sources. She distinguishes between what witnesses claim and what can be independently verified. She does not overstate, which is precisely why what she said about Antarctica landed the way it did. Because careful people who have spent 40 years qualifying their statements do not suddenly say they must tell the truth unless something has changed. Antarctica is the context that makes this story as significant as it is. The continent has occupied a strange and persistent position in the conversation about hidden history and concealed phenomena for decades, and the reasons for that are not entirely disconnected from reality. Antarctica is the most remote and least accessible landmass on Earth. It is covered by an ice sheet averaging more than 2 kilometers in thickness, beneath which lies an entire continent of geology, topography, and potentially preserved ancient landscape that is almost entirely unmapped by direct investigation. What we know about the terrain beneath the Antarctic ice sheet comes primarily from airborne radar surveys that can penetrate the ice and return data about the bedrock below. Those surveys have revealed a landscape of extraordinary complexity: mountain ranges, deep valleys, ancient lake systems that have been sealed beneath the ice for millions of years and that harbor microbial life adapted to conditions of complete isolation and darkness. A geological history that, in certain regions, appears dramatically different from what standard models of Antarctic glaciation would predict. The political and logistical framework surrounding Antarctica is itself unusual. The Antarctic Treaty System, established in 1959 and signed by the major world powers, designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve and prohibits military activity, resource extraction, and territorial claims. It also, notably, restricts access to certain regions of the continent in ways that go beyond what purely scientific management would require. Military flights over specific Antarctic zones require clearances that are not publicly explained. Certain research stations operate under classification protocols that are inconsistent with the treaty's stated commitment to open scientific exchange, and the history of human activity in Antarctica includes episodes that have never been fully declassified or explained, including Operation High Jump, the 1946 to 1947 American naval expedition to Antarctica, commanded by Admiral Richard Byrd, that involved an extraordinary concentration of military force, including aircraft carriers, submarines, and thousands of naval personnel, for what was officially described as a scientific and mapping exercise. Operation High Jump was abruptly curtailed months before its planned completion date. The official explanations for the early termination have never been entirely satisfying, and Admiral Byrd's subsequent statements, including references to a new threat to America arising from the polar regions and describing aircraft of extraordinary performance that had appeared during the expedition, have generated speculation for 70 years. Whether those statements mean what some researchers have concluded they mean, or whether they have been taken out of context and misrepresented, is a question that the historical record does not cleanly resolve. But the combination of High Jump's anomalous military scale, its early termination, and Byrd's subsequent comments established Antarctica as a location carrying a persistent suggestion of concealment around it that subsequent events have not entirely dispelled. The contemporary layer of the Antarctica story involves developments that have accelerated significantly in recent years. Satellite imaging technology has advanced to the point where features beneath and within the ice sheet can be detected with increasing resolution. Researchers examining publicly available satellite data have identified formations in specific regions of Antarctica that do not match the geological baseline established by radar survey data of the bedrock beneath the ice. Formations that appear in the ice itself or at the ice-bedrock interface, with geometric characteristics inconsistent with glaciological processes. Some of these formations have been examined and attributed to natural processes of ice dynamics or subglacial geology. Others have not been satisfactorily explained within existing natural frameworks, and the official scientific response to questions about them has been notable for what it does not say as much as for what it does. Into this context, Linda Moulton Howe's disclosure arrives with a specific and detailed claim that goes beyond the ambiguous satellite imaging data and the unresolved questions about high jump. What she is reporting, drawing on sources she describes as multiple, independent, and including current and former personnel with direct knowledge of classified Antarctic programs, is that structured non-natural formations have been found beneath the Antarctic ice in at least 2 locations. The locations her sources identify are in East Antarctica, in a region of the ice sheet that sits above what radar survey data indicates is relatively stable ancient bedrock rather than the more geologically active zones near the continent's margins. This matters because the preservation conditions in stable ancient bedrock zones beneath the ice are extraordinary. Material buried beneath the Antarctic ice sheet in regions of low geothermal activity and minimal ice flow can be preserved in a state of near-perfect physical integrity for timescales that dwarf anything in the conventional human historical record. The ice is not a destructive environment for solid material. It is one of the most preservative environments on Earth. What is placed beneath it or trapped beneath it when glaciation advances over it is held in conditions of cold, darkness, and physical stability that prevent virtually all of the degradative processes that destroy preserved material in more accessible environments. The implication of structures preserved beneath Antarctic ice in ancient bedrock zones is therefore not simply that something was built there and survived. It is that something was built there before the ice covered it. And the Antarctic ice sheet in its current extent has been present for approximately 34 million years in its basic form, with significant fluctuations in thickness and extent across glacial cycles. The timing of when specific regions of East Antarctica became ice-covered is a complex glaciological question with some regional variation, but the broad answer is that the Antarctic interior has been under significant ice for a very long time, longer than any recognized human civilization, longer than the human species as currently defined has existed. This is where the implications of Howe's disclosure move beyond the category of classified military programs or suppressed scientific findings and into territory that challenges the foundational assumptions of human history and human origins. Because if what her sources describe is accurate, the question of who built what is beneath the Antarctic ice does not have an answer that fits within the current scientific consensus about the timeline and geographic distribution of technological civilization on this planet. The answer would require either a dramatic revision of what we understand about human prehistory, extending the timeline of technologically capable human civilization far beyond any currently accepted date, or the acknowledgement that the builders were not human in the sense that we currently use that term. Howe does not claim to know which of those possibilities the evidence supports. She is careful to present what her sources describe, and to note the limits of what she can independently verify. But she makes clear that the convergence of testimony she has received from multiple independent sources, sources who, in some cases, have no knowledge of each other and who have arrived at consistent descriptions through entirely separate channels, has crossed a threshold for her. The threshold at which continued careful qualification feels less like journalistic rigor and more like a failure of honesty. The scientific response to what Howe has disclosed has followed a predictable pattern that anyone familiar with how institutions handle anomalous claims will recognize immediately. Silence, primarily. The specific claims she has made are not the kind that generate rapid official response, because any official response requires either acknowledging information that may be classified or dismissing claims in terms specific enough to be falsifiable, and neither option serves the interests of institutions that prefer the claims to simply not be taken seriously by the mainstream audience. But the silence has not been universal. Several researchers working in adjacent areas of Antarctic geology, glaciology, and remote sensing have made quiet inquiries through professional channels about access to the specific regions Howe's sources identify. Those inquiries have encountered obstacles that the researchers involved describe as unusual relative to normal scientific access procedures under the Antarctic Treaty Framework. Access restrictions that exist on paper, but whose justification is not clearly documented in any publicly available record. The pattern of restricted access in the specific regions that appear in Howe's account is not proof of what her sources claim, but it is consistent with it in a way that researchers who have encountered those restrictions have noted with varying degrees of professional caution. The broader context of what is happening with disclosure of previously classified information about anomalous phenomena makes Howe's timing significant. The years since 2017 have seen a sustained and unprecedented movement of information from the classified domain into public acknowledgement. The Pentagon's acknowledgement of UAP programs, congressional hearings featuring testimony from military and intelligence personnel about non-human intelligence and non-human craft, the establishment of formal government bodies tasked with investigating UAP phenomena and reporting to Congress. The cultural and institutional landscape around these questions has shifted more dramatically in less time than at any previous point in the modern era. People who would not have spoken 10 years ago are speaking now. Howe's disclosure is arriving in a context where the threshold for what can be said publicly has been moving steadily in one direction. What Antarctica holds beneath its ice is a question that the scientific community has genuinely grappled with for decades in terms of its natural history, its subglacial lakes, its preserved ancient atmosphere and ice cores, its geological records stretching back through deep time. The continent is legitimately one of the most scientifically significant and least understood places on Earth, and the answers it holds about Earth's climate history, geological history, and the conditions that shape the biosphere are real and important and still being actively investigated. That legitimate scientific importance exists alongside and separate from the questions that Linda Moulton Howe's disclosure raises, but the two are not entirely unconnected. Because the same qualities that make Antarctica so scientifically significant, its age, its preservation conditions, its remoteness, its capacity to hold the record of the deep past in a state of physical integrity unavailable anywhere else on Earth, are precisely the qualities that would make it the most likely place on this planet to find physical evidence of something that does not fit the timeline we have constructed for intelligent activity on Earth. She spent 40 years following evidence carefully and qualifying every conclusion. And then she said she must tell the truth. The question that her disclosure leaves hanging in the air, unresolved and genuinely important, is not whether Linda Moulton Howe is credible. 40 years of documented, sourced, methodical work has established that. The question is what the truth she feels compelled to tell will look like when the ice finally gives it up. Antarctica has been keeping its secrets under 2 kilometers of ice for longer than our entire civilization has existed. Whatever's down there has been waiting with extraordinary patience. And if what she is saying is accurate, the waiting may be nearly over.